how to construct it and how to make the pattern. The next level is simply to get the fabric right, and that means it has to come from the same plant, wool, animal, sorry, or yeah, so a plant or animal, no in between that, and then spun the same matter into the same thread. That thread has to be dyed the same manner and finally loomed into the same way. Using the same loom, ideally, it is just easier. And now it is easy for looms. Now the threads, the yardage he uses, I think, are the same. To still make wool using the same way. This is more or less easier, but the problem is it is not dyed the same manner, because these processes, and also all of these things, to still exist in very modern places like Britain, which have a ton of quality control, health control things, and it is completely impossible for them to do it the same manner, because they need health insurances and all, and these things have, beginning in the 1920s, becoming well as implemented, as in seriously physically implemented in the 1940s, and since the 1950s it just augmented, and each year they add a new law to protect the health of people. That is the reason for which people barely work 5 hours a day now and just become lazy as hell and live for ages, because of all that pyramidal structure that has built step by step. So the only way it could be in any regards dyed the same manner would be to get an original yarn, so the original big sewing thing, but it's not really for sewing, it is actually thicker and made to yarn. Whether it be cotton, linen, wool, whatever. Well, there's only cotton, linen, wool, or silk, if it is a natural material desire. And I don't know if they had polyester, but it was only used for the poorest people working in industries. Forget that. So it will be either linen, wool, or silk, or cotton, or flax, which is a different thing than linen. Flax is like my shed. It is not linen. So actually the plant flax can be turned into linen, what it usually is, or a more primitive manner of doing it is turning it into something called flax, which is a heavier, it is like super thick linen, and very breathable, and it is like those traditional French antique shirts. People call them thick linen. They are almost undifferentiable from the thickest linen, but in truth it is flax, like that shirt. And obviously, these wools, whatever, can be all mixed together into a yarn and then to make a mixed cloth. But anyhow, the problem is how it has dyed. So the solution is finding original yarns, and I think there are way more original yarns available from all factory stocks from that era, rather than original cloth that has already been loomed. The problem is original yarns, maybe not for cotton especially, to some degree is not linen, especially if it is a thick one, and not silk. If it is the luxurious silk of the late 19th century, be careful, be aware, most silks back then were already fake silks, which are actually genuine silk, but not made the traditional manner. So basically they still use these baby worms, but they kill them when they are much younger. They boil them in the water when they are much younger because it costs less. It is a faster process. So the silk made is much weaker, and whether it be a yarn or a cloth, it would not have survived more than 100 years, surely. It actually disintegrated after probably 50 years, 70 years max, even for yarn. So it may look perfect when you unbox it, but as soon as one shall start to loom it, it will sooner or later just break, and you do not want that. So it has to be the more expensive, that was always expensive to make, because one has to, the process is much longer, and it can only be done by hand. And it exists in antiquity, and the price has really never really decreased because of the expense of the project. It only decreased because now transportation is easier, and it was very easy in the 19th century. But otherwise, the making of the cloth can only be done by hand, and this is natural silk, isn't it? There's natural silk, so. And yes, so if you find those yarns, I think the natural silk and the cotton can have survived well, but for wool it is often not the case, except for the thickest wool that would be used from the old Sheffield or West, northern Scotland, or even our Iceland sheep. And to have a breed of sheep in Iceland, which unsurprisingly because of the weather there, have a super dense wool, so the opposite of a merino wool, like the wool one desires to make the thickest blankets required for Eskimos. And on top of that, when they shave those old sheep, the older they get, the thicker and sturdier and itchier the wool gets. And if you were to have made a yarn out of that type of sheep back in 1850, even 1850, I'm sure, as long as it was kept in a moderately, even not perfect weather conditions, not too humid and not too cold, not too warm, and inside a box, it would perfectly have survived until today. But one shall only be able to make the thickest sort of British, but for winter country. If it is for Britain, the soap will be super thick. So for other types of wools, I think, I don't know anything, but I think it, even as a yarn, it will not have survived well. So this is the problem of making it and spending the time researching those yarns. You may have to contact, for example, the London cloth seller. He may do the work for you and eventually has to spin an entire cloth for you. And eventually, whereas if you want to making it yourself, you will spend all the energy doing this sort, trousers, whatever, or pay somebody else to do it for you, pay a lot more money for somebody else to do it for you, and then you had that so was meant to last 2 years and start looking when after. Imagine one was to wear it absolutely every day. It would last 2 years before really it would. In many places it would be just broken down, so there's no point patching it. It would just look ugly. And it would start getting worn after a year of wear, 365 wears. But truly, because the yarn is so old and it can't be really conserved that long, the worn out state would begin after 6 months and probably can't be worn after a full year. Or worse, he starts spinning, looming the cloth, so you already paid him, you have to pay him, he did a lot of work, and suddenly the cloth breaks and he contacts you from his warehouse in London and tells you, you know what, actually we tried, but the cloth is dead because the yarn was dead. There's no point continuing. So that is a problem, but that would be the only manner, because in such a case, if the yarn was original, it would have been dyed. They used to dye by yarn, by the yarn on the only cloth, good quality cloth, which is dyed by the cloth itself after it has been loomed. In other words, after it has become cloth, is some types of linen, luxurious linens, because they are too fragile to dye by yarn. And that is the reason for which many luxurious linen suits, like the one Kirby Allison had made by Diffage and Brothers, his navy double-breasted linen suit, he explains that, and he had warned in the teller, he told them, because it is a luxurious linen, it is a very thin linen, like a very young, like to kill the pen when it was very young. So it is too fragile to dye. It was dyed with indigo, which is the least hard on cloth or yarn, whatever, way of dyeing, which is also one of the oldest ways of dyeing, which is a vegetable-based dye. And so therefore, it cannot impregnate clothing like chromium-based dyes used, for example, the annealing technique, which has been banned, or the modern chromium-based dyes, which are much safer, which do not tattoo it as well as the 19th century, but chromium means chemical-based dyes, but which still impregnated well. That type of linen, he explained in Teller, would be damaged through that process of chromium-based dye. So it is dyed the most expensive manner. It was always the most expensive manner because it is the most time-consuming, which is dyed using natural ways. They would not have done that way for that, but you can do it at home if you want. You can simply take a tunnel, like a barrel, and they use the indigo pigment in water and they just pull it in and boil it and it dyes it, whichever color you want, usually for navy. He did it for dark navy, but so that dye, it goes away quickly, even when it is done by yarn. And worst of all, because it was a very thin linen, it could only be done not by yarn, so the yarn had to be made before. It was like a natural yarn, loomed into a cloth, so it would have been a natural cloth, natural colored linen, like that shed, like a sort of ecru color. And then, once loomed into a cloth, before cutting it into a shed, it would be dyed, as I explained, in the indigo manner. But that means that, as I said, after a month of wear, barely, and he wears his stuff like only in offices and stuff, already it was becoming white at the elbows and white everywhere, like the dye was going away. So that is the problem of, but this will have to be done for, so basically the only manner of doing it historically accurate would be obviously to dye it naturally. And many cloths today are